Guys, you guys don't know me. I'm Mike Rode. Been working here at Pscu for a while. I figure we go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves and give us a little tidbit about themselves. No. That's a little inside joke. That's an inside joke there for the guys that went to Togaf training. What we're going to talk about is Togaf version 9.1. What we'll do is we'll do an overview. Part 1, the introduction, and we'll go into more depth about the Togaf 9.1 standard. Togaf, what it stands for is the Open Group Architecture Framework. We're going to go into what is the enterprise architecture, what are some of the architecture types that are out there, and the benefits of enterprise architecture, just as a quick overview and introduction. The Open Group is just like Mahmoud said, group that's trying to get standards across all tiers of organizations, big and small. So they're building up standards, they're trying to follow certain specifications, and they're trying to involve and encompass all of these other paradigms. You heard Mahmoud mention ITIL, there's COBIT, and there's a couple other different specifications and frameworks that lend itself towards Togaf, and Togaf allows for us to incorporate those within it. Enterprise architecture, I mean, you've probably heard me chime in on it a lot of times when we're doing tech assessments or anything. It's about building business processes and common building blocks that we can leverage across systems. In an effort to try and help reduce development effort, shorten time to delivery. So Togaf is a blueprint to help with that process. Architecture types, I mean, you'll hear us talking about, some of you have probably heard Sandeep, Jennifer, Tom, Judy, or I talking about, A, B, C, D. You'll basically understand what some of that stuff means later on. But the major architecture types is business architecture, the people, the business processes, all of that type of stuff that's critical to get the job at hand done for the business side of things. The other side of it is application architecture. We're building up services. Are we building up a common infrastructure for us to leverage across all of these applications? Are we building a cross-cutting domain solution versus building our own little independent silo? Data architecture, this kind of goes into the enterprise information model, logical data models. Are we leveraging logical data models? Are we building up infrastructures that we can leverage across all of these applications? Case in point, CU Scripter and CallPro 3. We still haven't gone through a data unification process. I mean, that would fall in this area. What is it going to take to make that happen? And then the technology architecture is really like infrastructure, servers, network routers, hubs, all that type of stuff. Okay. The benefits of enterprise architecture, I kind of went through some of them already, but I'll go through them. It's going to be about business, it's going to be about IT, about investment decisions, and procurement of third-party products. For the business, the thought process is that so we can deliver something to them and give them an environment where they can make decisions and stand up something quick. They need to be agile. They need to be flexible. They need to have an environment that they can handle and leverage. So that's one of the benefits of enterprise architecture, is we're standing up systems that can be leveraged across the organization, and we could do concepts like mashups and stuff like that. For IT, I mean, this is pretty simple. I mean, I would argue that this is like a resource thing. We get everybody trained on this is the way we do it. This is the standard process for developing applications, either Java or .NET. And then we all kind of fall in line with that versus us building our own implementation and following our own different standards, our own silos. The problem is you can't leverage that resource from one project to the next if you're using different technologies, and it makes it difficult for the company, Pscu, to move forward. The other thing is the thought process is procurement of third-party products. One of the historical things at Pscu is we just buy best of breed. Or we go out and we buy an appliance, or we buy this, or we buy that, and we just throw it in there. The problem is what this process is going to what enterprise architecture helps with is the procurement of these third-party vendors. And we'll go into more detail there on the process for procuring third-party. So now we'll get into the details of the Togaf. What we kind of already done is, you notice on the first slide I said part 1, which is introduction. Really, that's kind of like the preface, the core concepts of Togaf, and we review the introduction of what Togaf's about, what the benefits are, some of the reasons for having Togaf in place. The next part is part 2, which is the architecture development method, which is the ADM, which will be the ABCD thing. The ADM guidelines, I'll go into more detail. Architecture context framework, the enterprise continuum and tools, the reference models, and the architecture capability framework. There's some drawings that you'll probably see throughout the slide deck, and this shows a representation of what each one of these major parts is. I mean, it doesn't show intro, but it shows the ADM, the architecture contact frameworks, reference models, ADM guidelines and techniques, enterprise continuum, and the architecture capability frame. The first part is the ADM. The ADM is the core portion of Togaf. It's the essence of Togaf at all levels of PSCU's organization or at any organization. The preliminary phase is that's like the first phase of this of the architecture development method, and this is really an iterative process. So like phase A is the architecture vision. So what would happen is we would come in, and there would be some type of request. We need to make a change to this environment, our PSCU environment. So the first step would be, okay, well, let's start gathering some information. Let's get a statement of work built up. Let's understand what this environment, what this change impact is going to be. The next phase is business architecture. What's the business architecture involved around this specific solution or implementation that we're trying to get to? Phase C is information system architecture. This is around application and information architectures, which you saw in a previous slide. The technology architecture is just that, the infrastructure. And opportunities and solutions. This is where a lot of stuff will get generated from based on that. So this is where we're actually doing some level of analysis on our current environment and saying, hey, we have an opportunity, or here's a new solution. Some of that stuff might come out of there, and then we start a whole new ADM process again from there. Migration planning, that's kind of like it says, is what is it going to take to get us from point A to point B with that solution. The implementation of governance. The governance board, some of you may have heard of it off and on. There's an oversight team. I would argue that's the start of the governance board. And that the intent is that's going to be where we kind of review what the different technologies are coming into PSCU and making sure that they conform to what our architecture standards are across the company. The architecture change management. I would argue in my mind, as Mahmoud said, that this is really ITIL right here. H and E is ITIL, the way I understand it. And that's where the changes come in. Like we need a quick change. I think Arvin had some slides where he talked about low level of effort, medium level effort, high level of effort. Depending on that type of level of effort that comes out of this architecture change management, this ITIL group, may kick off another ADM cycle for these projects. And the requirements management, that's just the central repository for all the documentation. For each one of those phases, there's specific inputs and outputs at each one of those phases. So there's a list of, well, I'll go into it later, but there's a list of documentation that we need to generate at each phase of the ADM cycle. And then this is a specific, if you're taking the test, you need to know this. Each one of the documents are version labeled in a certain order. The ADM guidelines this kind of goes back to that original slide, which we talked about part 1, part 2. Now we're at part 3, which is the ADM guidelines. And what the ADM guidelines is the instruction. It's kind of like the instructor, the user's guide for the ADM. You go in there and find out, okay, for phase B, here's the type of inputs, here's the type of processes, this is the steps for setting up, requesting information, here's the outputs for this section. And that's what they expected. Here's some templates that we can follow and stuff like that. So the ADM is a guideline and techniques for implementing the ADM process. So guidelines for adapting the ADM process, there's a ways to apply it. It's iterative, definitely. The ADM is at different levels of the organization. I think there's another slide coming up that talks about that. Security considerations for each different phases. I got cut off. And it supports SOA as well. There's a whole section in Togaf, which we didn't go over in class, so if you have questions about it, we'll have to take it offline. Part of the ADM guidelines and techniques is here's a list of techniques for gathering information. One of them is the architecture principles, which is something I think that PSCU should probably embrace and start referencing and maybe build up our own principles here at PSCU. Later on, and I think a couple slides down, we talked, the group that went to Togaf training, we kind of said, let's get together and define some principles, and I included those in the slide deck. Stakeholder management, architecture patterns, business scenarios. This one's pretty big. I can't remember the acronym. Specific, measurable, actionable. I don't remember. I'll have to look it up again. I got that answer right on the test, I think. Gap analysis, this one's big, right? I mean, gap analysis, the thought process there is you have to have a current state and a future state, and then you can figure out what the gaps are with that. And or you have a capabilities list of here's what we're looking for functionality. Here's what this product has to offer. What's the gap assessment there?
Realistic and time-bound.
Yeah, you're right. Realistic and time-bound, yes. Good job. Migration planning techniques, interoperability requirements. You know, this one's kind of big here at PSU. Is the business transformation readiness assessment. Is PSU ready for this type of change? We don't know. I don't think we do enough of that. And capability, based planning. All right, next. Here's one of the business principles: compliance with law. This is Fed regs. We gotta, one of our principles is we have to comply with Fed regs. So, I mean, this was a good principle. This is one of the core Togaf principles. This is number 7. What we did is we captured a principle from each. Data principles. This one's pretty near and dear and a pain in my butt at PSCU. We don't have a common vocabulary and data dictionary, data definitions, across the organization. You can ask one person, what's the user ID in this table? Well, it's this number for this person, it's this number for this person in this app, and it's this number and this person for this app. So this goes back to the whole data unification, master data management. I think this is key to help PSCU move forward with all of these as we integrate all these other applications. Application principle, technology independence. This is a case where we can, this is SOA, this is build up web services so we can use them on any bring your own device type of technology, thought process so we can call and leverage these web services. Technology principles, interoperability. This is just ensure consistency across the infrastructure, make sure we're the same across the board. This is not having 5 different versions of JBoss out there. Here's another flow of the ADM guidelines and techniques. As you can see that there's a strategic architecture. There's an ADM flow for the strategic architecture, which flows into the segments, which flows into the capabilities. So really at Togaf, we can do Togaf at any given level of PSU's organization. So I would argue that if you have the opportunity, I would be running some level of Togaf on your projects as well to gather all the proper documentation and put it into the requirements management area. The architecture context framework, this is a significant part of the Togaf framework where we store a lot of the, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where we store a lot of the architecture artifacts. And here's the different work products that we create. The deliverables, the artifacts, and the building blocks is all contained in the architecture context framework. And here's the different types of segments of it, data entities, logical components. This is the information system. As you see it's broken out into the data and the application, technology, platform, logical technology. So this is kind of showing you a representation of how we would store this type of information in the architecture context framework. This is the architecture vision and requirements section. The gaps. So a lot of these documents, when we're generating them, we need to start putting them into this repository. The benefits of the architecture framework, it provides a comprehensive checklist of the outputs, helps us get a better vision of what we're trying to integrate. And the thought process that goes back to it helps with consistency, right? We're trying to get all these documents and we're trying to be consistent across all these products. Deliverables, artifacts, and building blocks. Here's a list of what some of them are. The building blocks, I mean, that one's pretty big. We'll talk more about that in the enterprise continuum. And the artifacts, I mean, there's a couple different types of artifacts we can create, catalogs, matrices, and diagrams. Those are all going to be part of the iterative ADM process. This shows a relationship between the deliverables, artifacts, and building blocks. As you can see, there's an architectural deliverables and the building blocks, and we might generate different catalogs, matrices, diagrams. We might pull in and describe the different building blocks. And then we eventually move that information into the architecture repository. This is an example of an architecture definition document where we have building a requirement, with customer service representative. Here's the different process flows, here's the use cases, and that type of information. And here's what the building block is: a basic call handling process and a target call handling process. The enterprise continuum overview. This one was pretty interesting. It kind of goes into a discussion about architectures versus solutions. And the thought process is that the architectures define and illustrate what type of functionality we're looking for. It's like an abstraction where the solution is an implementation of that architecture. The enterprise continuum is a grouping of architecture and solutions. And the intent is that, as you like over here in the foundation architecture, this is very high level, very abstract type of concepts. Primarily, and most of us will probably be living here, which is the common system architectures that we're building. And then there's industry architectures where you're specifically talking about a specific industry branch. And then there's organization. So like for fraud department, they would only have this and that type of architecture. None of these are actual implementations. These are just basically documenting and illustrating what the capabilities are, what the type of interface we're looking for, what type of infrastructure we're looking for that specific architecture. Then what happens is as we drop down, we have solutions. These solutions actually are additional documentation that support what was representing in that architecture. So as you can see, it's basically very abstract down to very descriptive, very abstract down to very granular. This section is the reference model. There's two reference models. There's the technical reference model and there's the integrated information infrastructure reference model. And one of the core concepts in Togaf is boundaryless information flow. And the last one here is part of that. And that's what the essence of Togaf is to just keep the information flowing. That way we have a good idea on what's going on in our infrastructure. The TRM, the technical reference model, provides a core taxonomy for the platform service. In this case, it's a foundation architecture. It can be used to build any system architecture. The IIIRM is a subset of it, and I would argue, I kind of already talked about this as well. This is the information structure to enable boundaryless information flow. This feeds into that core foundation architecture. The components of the IIIRM is taxonomy, definitions, terminology, description of the components, conceptual structures, any type of visual representations associated with that implementation. More detail regarding it. Security, qualities, mobility, management policy, performance SLAs. Here's the development tools that we're leveraging, broker applications, management utilities, information consumer applications. So there's quite a bit here that we need to expand on more. The architecture capabilities framework, I would argue this is more around the people and the process at Pscu. This is actually setting up, in this case, the governance body, the roles and responsibilities, what type of training do we need, skills, knowledge, architecture professions, all that type of information that surrounds a deliverable. So if we build up this common system architecture, what is the skill sets? What's the support organization? What type of roles, what type of information, knowledge do we need to have in order to support this architecture? What other capabilities? The architecture capability framework is, establishing an architecture capability. That in itself could be a ADM process. Keep that in mind. Architecture board, architecture compliance, contracts, governance, the architecture, maturity models, and the skills framework. I mean, that type of stuff. That's what's involved in delivering a architecture. Establishing an architecture capabilities using the ADM. We got to define the vision, goals, drivers, principles of the architecture practice. So what are we trying to do with this? What are we trying to get out of this architecture capability? The next step is define the process views, how the framework to be used, what performance measures are required. Define the data that's going to be required to store in the architecture repository. Also what applications are required to assist with the process defined in phase B. Define technology infrastructure supporting the architecture practice. How best to manage the organization changes that are required, how this is achieved, how best to adopt the new systems and processes, governing and implementation of business architecture. Changes to the process system should be managed here, and requirements to be clearly articulated inside. The architecture board responsibilities. This is where a lot of the decision making gets made in the architecture. It provides some level of consistency across subsystems. It's one central point where we're actually bringing all the different technologies and trying to make sure we got some level of focus across all of these implementations that we're doing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mahmoud, but I would argue this is the oversight team right now as it stands.
Sort of the yes.
Yes. There's also another steering team above the oversight team called ATTACK. So I think it's a collaboration effort between the two. And I think at some point, I think SWAT would fit in there as well. This is where we can, target, reuse of components. Normally, I would argue this would be captured in the tech assessment, but flexibility of the architectures. This one's kind of tough because this one's always been hard for PSU, but this is the enforcement of architecture compliance. In my mind, I've always tried to be very flexible with that, but with the advent of this architecture board, I think we're going to see maybe a little bit more, making sure we kind of comply and play nice with each other a little better. The other thing is it helps improve the maturity level of PSU. I mean, right now, if you were to look at the CMMI and compare that to PSU, we're pretty bad, as Sam mentioned in one of our first meetings we had with Sam as an all-hands meeting. This kind of goes back to the same thing with what I was talking about before, the ITS governance and architecture capabilities. The establishing some architecture contracts. I mean, that's another thing that's part of Togaf is here's some contracts, here's some rules and guidance that we need to try and follow when we're doing these implementations. Contract between architecture function and the business users. So it's basically saying here's what we've decided on. Let's make sure that we're following the contract. It's no different if it would be a contract with a third-party vendor. Here's the contract we have established. We're going to have this, this, and this. We need this and this capability. You need to deliver that. And the same thing within PSU. I have a contract with this other portion of the organization. We need to make sure that we're in compliance. This is the architecture governance key processes. Policy management, compliance, dispensation, monitoring and reporting, and business control. This is, like I was saying before, this is really the part of the oversight team. I think it's going to be, I think as other teams get stood up and we start integrating all of these, we need to make sure we have a consistent process flow across all of these different teams and establishments. That way we can deliver a proper message across. I think this is where the ADM kind of fits in SWAT. It could potentially fit in with SWAT. It can fit in with the oversight team and again, all the way up to, the business as well. EA maturity model. I mean, that's one of the things as part of the architecture capabilities framework is to define what the maturity model is of the organization as a data point. Remember, this is boundaryless information, so we're bringing in all these different specifications and practices for defining what the organization, about the organization. And then here, this is just an example of, here's a EA maturity models. I think we're down here somewhere, and that's my personal opinion. I'm sure other people would probably think differently, and hopefully I'm not trying to upset anybody, but in my mind, based on what I've seen, we've got a lot of work ahead of us because we're a very reactive group. I think most organizations are here at level 3, and based on what I understand and heard in the past, it's taken years, just bump from. So 2 years takes to get to here. The other thing is the architecture skills framework. I mean, there's a little bit more involved with the architecture capability framework, but I didn't want to go into too much details here. I mean, I've already kind of beat a dead horse, but this is kind of what I've already talked about, which is what's the skills required for this architecture? What type of organization do we have to have behind this architecture in order to support it moving forward? Because the company needs to know that type of information because it needs to make those it needs to make decisions based on that. In summary, the ADM is an iterative process, and it can happen enterprise-wide or down to the project level. So depending on what you're working on, there's always an opportunity to leverage the ADM and put that information in the architecture content repository. The ADM guidelines and techniques, this is basically like it says, here's a guideline, here's the inputs, here's the outputs for this different phase of the ADM, and here's some techniques to gather some of that information and help you get to that output that you're looking for. The architecture content framework, this is where we're going to store a lot of the architecture building blocks and type of information. This is where the continuum sits, right? Enterprise continuum sits in there. The enterprise continuum sits in there. Enterprise continuum is, like we talked about, shows a high-level architecture, shows what the different solutions we have. So the thought process is if we ever had to go back and figure out some information about this solution or about what this implementation was, we would go down here and say, give me more information about it. And then if we wanted to know what the actual architecture deliverables were, as far as what we're trying to deliver, you would go up in here and say, what's the architecture continuum representation of that solution? Here's the two reference models. The Togaf reference model, this is a foundation architecture. The III RM, I would argue, is a common system architecture. And this is, remember, keep in mind that this is the implementation, the thought process is a boundaryless flow of information. Architecture capabilities framework. This is where we define what about the organization, skills, roles, responsibilities, establishing and operating the architecture. One of the things that when we went to class, our instructor, his name was Steve Ells, he kind of left us with this at the end of it, and it kind of sunk in. But the thought process is, Togaf is really about vision, getting a baseline, defining the target, figuring out what the gaps are, what type of choices can we make, what's the roadmap, the implementation, and then we need to govern. That was the essence of Togaf from Steve Ells' point of view. And for mine, they kind of like sunk in because, yeah, that's what Togaf's all about. When you're doing each project at any level, here's what you need to know. It's like, what am I trying to deliver? What do I already have? What am I trying to get to? What do I need to, what's the issues and concerns with building that solution? What type of choices do I have? What of those options, what can I do? Where does this fit in with the roadmap? And let's implement it, and now we have to govern it and maintain it. Sam's question is when are we going to do the first iteration of the ADM and Togaf implementation and generate a list of artifacts so that everybody can see what type of documents were generated based on the Togaf templates and deliverables? And then the question, I deferred the question to Mahmoud because at some point we need to define which project that's going to be and move that project forward with Togaf.
You're absolutely right. Answering to Sam's question, it's impossible right now with the way we structure our actually IT side. We can really build this sort of foundation to totally comply with the Togaf recommendations. But specific to your question, is possibility that we're using these types of the guidance in our analytic projects. So in analytics projects, we're supposed to have a library of the documents and artifacts to show that what we have done through this process. The best practice is that right, our recommendation there. Actually, James already creating these types of the library in SharePoint. But any document we're creating there for purpose of the being sure, then people knows exactly where we're going and what is our experience from the perspective of the best practice are going to be documented in SharePoint.
To what Mahmoud is talking about, with the centers of excellences that we have created, there is going to be horizontal capability for all the BAs to be able to coordinate and cooperate in order for us to be able to catch the best practices that they are running across those elements. And for example, using Blueprint as one of the examples where we will be able to start depositing these, all the business related documents and requirements documents and others. So there is a process that has to go through, right? And I think as the organization starts gelling together, then we will start finding out if there are any gaps that we have to meet in order to achieve that maturity levels.
Any thoughts around an incentive program? It could be Togaf, it could be ITIL, it could be for anything that provides us the opportunity to do things on our own, outside of our domain, to get these certifications, maybe reimbursement.
You mean you talk about the training and?
Right.
That's an excellent question, Michael. And I'm always looking for entrepreneurship. So if you guys want to go to a training and you want the management to reimburse you outside the training domain, by all means, come and sit down with your manager. But I want the conversation to go something like this. I would like to attend X because I will deliver Y. And as a result of this, you're gonna get Z. So if that conversation revolves around that sequence of events and the reward, absolutely, I'm very open.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. I realize that it's a framework, but are there recommended tools like Arvin mentioned Blueprint, but like Provision and HP Quality Center and things like that? Are there recommendations that go along with this, or is that outside of the?
think Togaf is in itself abstract. So if there's a tool or something that we need to leverage and go over there, you know, that was one of the slide decks that talked about tools and guidelines, where we can bring those in. And I mentioned earlier in the process, you know, Togaf can incorporate COBIT, it can integrate it in ITIL. If we determine that, you know, this is the tool that we're going to leverage, I would argue that that's part of our architecture. We need to define what the skills sets requirements, what's the capability, what's the support organization we need to behind that tool, what type of, you know, what's the overhead and, you know, roles and responsibilities of that tool. That all feeds into the Togaf implementation. Now, if we want to, if you're asking, is there any recommendations per Togaf? Here's the best tool to use? No, there is not.
You were mentioning that ADF can be applied to various different...
ADM, yes.
ADM can be applied to various kinds of projects. As far as my limited understanding is, I have read that all the projects, they become part of the application framework, which is part of the Togaf. So if we are trying to iterate through every project using the Togaf methodology, then we are producing maybe like more than necessary artifacts, and it might hinder our following of the Scrum process kind of.
The thought process there is, this is a guideline, this is a framework that you can leverage. So what I'm saying is if you see something in there that you can leverage and you want to generate a specific artifact, you want to generate a specific document and leverage the Togaf principle on your project, yes, please do. I'm not saying you have to do it on your individual low-level project. Mahmoud might have a different opinion there, but I was just saying, you know, just start looking at it, start embracing it, start getting your head around it, what it is, and then look at what some of the requirements and just to get a better understanding and help educate yourself about the ADM.
Inside of that, you have different process and practice. Example of that, for example, is Scrum. Example of that is UML. Example of that is different design patterns. Best practice in development, is that right? Example of that maybe be sort of the project management or sort of the agile. So in this case, provide you sort of the enterprise points of the view of the application, but not specific to application. Is that right? Yeah. Because the whole notion here is that bringing the same taxonomy, the same process, the same governance to the lot of the applications in development. But inside of the application, you guys need to follow your best practice.
And Magic Draw does have a plugin for Togaf.
That's amazing.
This is Wes, so I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
Oh.
What G's question is, you know, for one of the architecture things that we're trying to do here at Pscu is stand up a Pscu web service catalog. That way any application can start consuming these web services. So what G's question, correct me if I'm wrong, was, you know, is the oversight team, this governance board, going to be responsible for looking at these web service calls and making a determination of if this is the proper web service call or not to make? I would argue that that might be too low level, and that might be part of the ESB team's infrastructure. And then if there's any type of capabilities or gaps that we need to address, then maybe that type of information would flow up to the oversight team and say, hey, look, here's some infrastructure, here's some opportunities for greatness, opportunities and solutions to expand what our current architecture is. Correct.
The time our architecture is going to be effective, that we significantly focusing on the reusability and shareability. Is that right? This is the time when we say we have a productivities. Why reusability and shareability? Because that makes our time to the market faster, make it more efficiency, bring the consistency around the SDLC. Is that right? For that purpose, we needed to implement SOA Architect. SOA Architect is happening at the different layers of the architectures. And one of them is ESB. Is that right? The intention in ESB here is that as much as possible to provide the same connectivities many times or the same plugging many times. Is that right? Or they have the same auditing and tracing capability for all transactions. Is that right? We're not reaching to that point. I'm thinking maybe it takes us maybe 1 year to reach to the points, to be productive. We are not yet. One, we're talking about the implementation of the SOA. Another one, we're talking about the process and governance to manage SOA. We sort of start that part right now. We started from perspective of the identifying oversight teams as a governance of the approving, rejecting, or conditionally accepting something that you have been part of. But it still is not enough. Because we needed, actually, Arvin is in charge of the right now building that one. We are going to have application architect governance. We are going to have a change management governance. We are going to have a code review governance. Is that right? That we are going to build it. Is that right? We are in process of doing that one, but you're absolutely right. Even if we have the best proposed guidelines, we need to have a stakeholder to support that. We are going to do it. Questions?
Yes, I have a question regarding instrumentation. Because as far as I understand, this is a guidance. You know, it's, as soon as you start filling it with muscle, you have to take a decision how you can do it, how you will do it. Have you ever give a thought to a rational unified process? I think rational unified process has the best instrumentation ever, the best tooling ever to provide that muscle to it is expensive, but right now
It is expensive.
we are going from the guidance to
The right guy is sitting here.
As he's digging into his pocket. And for you guys on the phone, Sam's digging in his pocket.
my name is Andrew Thomas.
Enter Thomas. I think what he's talking is absolutely right. What he's talking about that, he's talking about the approach by end-to-end tools. That end-to-end tool is something similar to rational rows.
Right.
That's right. What this tool can do it is starting from requirements up to the implementation and execution and actually maintenance is going to keep track of that and put everything in repository. Every change in that repository is subject to the access level control. So you sort of the managing end to end. Again, this discussion between me and my boss to see if we can get that. Question, please.
You were mentioning that ITIL and Togaf, like, are they synergic or they are?
See, it's a complementary.
They're complementary.
Yeah. I think you sort of described that.
Yes.
On the
Yeah.
side you mentioned.
Yeah. Because generally, if you pay attention, Togaf very much focusing on the web services and services as a what we call application as a services. And very much is coming and focusing on that part and saying instead of for example, right now our company, Pscu, from my perspective, it is very productive, production-centric types of the organization. What we're doing here, we have some products, we're giving these products to users or client or CU members or whatever. The intention here is to move from that production-centrics to this service-centrics. Is that right? Service-centrics enforce different methodology, different process, different life cycles. Is that right? But still the foundation needs to be managed by the Togaf. But the delivery of that is going to be managed by ITIL. So you can see it's a complementary.